Right, hello everybody. I think this should be working. Let me cut to my camera. Hello, let's see, 39, 40, yeah, I can see the attendees number going up, so I presume that means that things are working. Hello, thank you very much for joining me. And this webinar is around the ColorChecker video target. Let me cut to my other camera, there it is. ColorChecker video chart, which I'm going to be going through all of the different ways that it's useful, because it's much more than just simply something that you chuck in front of the camera when you start rolling and then leave it to someone else in post-production to do something with it. It's an incredibly useful tool at the point where you are setting up your lights, when you're getting your shot ready, at the point you hit record, and then that follows through and becomes useful again in post-production. And I'm going to attempt to show you that entire workflow through my setup here. I'm sure I've tried to run everything from the mains so that we don't get any kind of power dropouts, but actually this main camera I am running from a battery. It's a big battery, I'm sure it will last. I've got even a backup battery next to it, so I'm sure it'll be fine. But if anything drops out, in theory, it should be fairly straightforward to recover it. The main camera, which is actually this camera feed here, is the one that you're hearing me through. So you should always be able to hear me, even if this camera drops out, but hopefully it won't. I do know that there is because I'm looping through my monitor on this camera, occasionally when I change certain modes, the camera just drops out video and audio very briefly, but don't worry, hopefully it will come back, and if for some reason it doesn't, I'm sure Kate, who's hosting from Calibrite tonight, will quickly let me know through the chat. Okay, I'm going to crack on if that's right. I'm not going to do any nonsense about who am I and what I do. I make films and I get paid for it, and it's all great. I don't think I'm going to waste any of your time talking about me. I'm going to jump straight into the chart because genuinely, there's so much that you can do with it. There's so much to discuss that I'm worried if I waste any time talking about me or showing you any kind of fancy show reels or anything like that, that we won't actually get through everything, or at least not have any time for Q&A, which I'm really keen to do. If you do have any questions at any point, just chuck them into the questions, and I'll make sure to answer them either as I go, if I happen to spot them, or if not, I'll make sure there's time at the end for me to do it. And I also should point out that there's going to be a discount code added into the chat at the end of this presentation, which is for all of you wonderful attendees to use with Pro AV to get a discount. So thank you very much to Pro AV for allowing you guys to benefit from that, and I will remind you again at the end, but that will be posted, that code, into the chat at the end. Right, let's cut to this, the chart. Genuinely, this chart goes with me absolutely everywhere. My kit bag, chock full of lenses, camera bodies, all kinds of things, but the one thing, or maybe not the one thing, but certainly up there, if I got to a shoot and realized it wasn't there and this wasn't in my bag, it would be a big blow. It is an incredibly useful tool. I take it everywhere with me, and I'm such a huge proponent for these charts and what they can do for you, because they make such a huge difference to your consistency, the quality of your output. They make color grading much easier. I run a separate business, a color post house. I'm a professional colorist as well as a shooter. I run another business, Coro Films, which is my branded content video production agency. So I do wear multiple hats, but being a colorist, I'm always really appreciative when I get stuff from DOPs that it's very easy to normalize, because it means I can quickly get through the normalization and balance kind of stage, and then the consistency that would follow is then much easier, and I can quickly move to any of the kind of fancy aspects of color grading. Whereas the stuff that you get where the DOP is wildly off in terms of white balance or exposure, or they haven't really optimized the camera for the best image or the maximum dynamic range, or maybe they've made bad choices in terms of what gamma profile they're using, all of those things can trip me up as a colorist and mean that I'm spending a lot of time fixing just to normalize, rather than actually spending that time with the more creative and fun parts of color grading. So because I do multiple things, it always makes me very disciplined, I always think. So I'm hoping some of that discipline will rub off on you today. Right, let me cut to this camera, which I've just noticed has gone purple. That's great fun, isn't it? Talking about color. And I'm just going to hop out of my chair. I think that's just a loose HDMI cable. Let me just give it a wiggle, 1 second. It's done this a couple of times, but thankfully it didn't last very long each time it happened. And of course, this is now the longest period of time that it's spent doing it, which is really frustrating. Just 2 seconds. Let me cut back here, unplug. Let's just check. Why are you doing this to me now, you horrible thing? Honestly, the exact moment that I need it to not be doing this. Now, which cable is the one causing me the problems? Honestly, I honestly can't believe that. I've been checking this feed all day, monitoring it, and it did this a handful of times. And then it went away. And now it's not going away. There we go. Oh, that's interesting. Turning the waveform monitor on and off solved it. That's weird. Okay. Hopefully that won't happen again. And what you should be able to see, although I've realized the software platform we're using, the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, is actually slightly cutting off the edges of the screen, which I hadn't actually appreciated in advance, but hopefully you can see the waveform monitor there, which I'm pointing at the chart. So the first thing I need to think about when I'm shooting something, so I'm going to pretend in this scenario that I'm, sorry, let me just check this. I've got a note here saying that, that you can't see anything, which is worrying. Oh, you can, good, okay, fine, sorry, panicked me there. The first thing to consider when you're using the chart is using it to help with your exposure to a certain extent. You can fine tune later. I normally find it's good to kind of get your exposure pretty right, then white balance with it, and then just go back and make any final tweaks if you need to. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually, rather than using information from the chart immediately, I'm actually going to have a think about how I want to rate my camera. If I go back to my overlay just so I can see my menus, apologies that you can't see all of the menus here, but I'm just going to have a think about my camera settings. So I want this product shot to have as shallow depth of field as I can manage with this lens, and so I'm just going to open it up to 2.8. I also just need to make sure that my ISO isn't too high. At the moment it's at 12,800, which because I haven't got any other lights on at the moment, is very noisy, so I don't really want it like that. I'm going to think about what kind of noise I want and drop that down accordingly. So it's now gone obviously very dark, but that's fine because I can introduce some light. I also just need to set my shutter speed. I'm at 25 frames a second, so I need to make sure that's 50th, although it's an inanimate object, so actually I've got a bit more flexibility with that than I might do normally. And at the moment I'm just using a standard, just a daylight preset. I have daylight bulbs in my studio here. This is my color grading suite, so you can just about see some of them up here. Those are daylight balance bulbs, so I'm just using a daylight preset, but I will change that in a moment. Now, if I've rated my camera like this, and I can see that at f2.8 ISO 800, which gives me the maximum dynamic range from the camera I'm currently using, which is a Canon C70. I'm at a 50th of a second. I can see that it looks too dark, it's too underexposed, but I can obviously introduce light. So rather than altering the camera settings off what I think are the sort of ideal settings for getting the best image quality, I'm going to set those based on what I would ideally like, and then introduce light to help me actually achieve my exposure. Obviously, if this was the other way around and I was outside and it was too bright after rating the camera how I wanted it, then I would be using ND, doing the opposite. But right now, I'm simply adding in a light. This is a Light Panels Gemini 1x1, which I've just got sort of slapping straight into the front of the product. And I'm going to be adjusting my level of light. So I'm now not touching the camera. I'm literally just adjusting the light levels using the light fixture. And I think you can just about see it. Unfortunately, I think it might be cutting off the IRE numbers on the left, but I'm going to adjust it until the top part of the scope, which is the representative of the white part of the chart. So let me just point this out to you if you're not sure what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about the white part of the chart here. I'm just going to adjust that until it's showing on my waveform monitor as 60 IRE. So if I turn it up and down, you hopefully can see there's a sort of a flat line, fairly easy to spot, which is why I like to use the white chip. This is a 90% reflectance white, which is one of two very standard units of measurement that's used when camera manufacturers are talking about gamma curves and exposure. The other one being 18% reflectance or middle gray, which is actually the next chip down. So 90% reflectance, and then we've got 18% reflectance here, so otherwise known as middle gray. If I move this around, if you look in the waveform monitor, it's very easy for you to spot that flat line that represents the 90% white at the top of the chart. And because it's easy to spot in the waveform, I'm going to use that one. And I'm currently using, again, I think it's being cut off, unfortunately, in the shot, but I'm actually currently in Canon Log 2, which gives me the maximum dynamic range from this particular camera. And I know that that 90% white should, if exposed correctly for C-Log 2, should sit at 60 IRE, which is basically there, more or less. Now, that those values, you might think, well, how's anyone meant to just know that number off the top of their head? Well, the good news is that the camera manufacturers actually give you that information through their website. So you should be able to, let me come back to my other camera, you should be able to find that information very easily through the cameras, through the manufacturer's website. So normally through the support pages, there'll be some kind of white paper which will describe the different logs. I know Sony do this, Canon do this, pretty much everyone does this. Even DJI with their D-log for their drones, I know they have a white paper, and they will show you very simply 90% reflectance values and 18% reflectance values, and where they drop to when you move into their log profiles. And what you actually quickly discover, so you could look at endlessly different ones, particularly if you use a lot of cameras, you can look at all the different ones that will apply to you. But generally speaking, they all pretty much end up putting 90% reflectance at 60 IRE or thereabouts. So for example, I know S-Log 2 is 59 IRE. I know that S-Log 3 is 60 or 61 IRE. So they're all pretty much in the same ballpark. The other thing that you can do if you don't want to use that 90% one, and if you're more used to using middle gray, is you can use that next chip down. So let me show you that one as well. I'm going to move across to that one. And in fact, to help me with this, I'm going to use a tool in the camera called false color. So I'm just going to go into my menu, and I'm going to go into my assistance functions, false color, and I'm just going to turn that on. So you should now see my image. It's more or less black or white, but there is a green band. And if I adjust the brightness of the light, you can see me turning it down and turning it up. You can see those colors. Now with false color, what it's doing is it's using green to represent middle gray. So if I've done this correctly, which I have, you should see, when you're in false color, you should see that your middle gray chip, which is this second one down, you should see it go green like this, okay? Now, if you ever see pink, let's see if I can get some pink, there we go, on my hand. Pink in false color normally represents one stop over middle gray, okay? And then blue, with this camera, blue represents things that are under 0, and then there's also red, things that are above 100. So it's a fairly simple false color index. You can also get false color if you use any of, say, for example, the Atomos or small HD monitors, or any monitor that's got these false color things built in. It's a similar idea, but with this particular camera, I can use green, and I can see that it's exposed correctly based on that middle gray chip there. If I go back into the menu, let me turn false color off. I can also use zebra. So if I go to my zebras, if I set that, let's go to zebra 1, set it to 60% ±5, and then again you should see that. So I've set that for the white this time rather than the middle gray. You can see there's the zebras, and now there's no zebras. So if I get it to the point where I'm just starting to see the zebras appear, then I know that I'm within ±5%. I'm within range of that 60 IRE, which is where that 90% reflectance chip should land. Now, this is much, much easier if you're only recording in Rec 709. So let me sit back down. If you are, there I am. If I'm not shooting log, which occasionally happens, in fact, for stuff in my studio like this, I wouldn't necessarily shoot log. Log is designed for capturing large dynamic range scenes, and if I don't have a large dynamic range scene, then it's an extra step that's probably not necessary. I was shooting a video tutorial in here for a new course I'm doing for MZ recently, and that was entirely shot in standard Rec 709, and everything was lit to fit neatly within that, which works absolutely fine. If you are doing that and you're not actually shooting log, you can forget that whole 60 thing. It's even easier because 90 just sits at 90 IRE. Your middle gray will sit at 40 IRE. So it's very straightforward. So these are fairly standard numbers. But if you're new to them, there's nothing else to know. There's not some other sort of numbers you need to remember. It's not too complicated. The nice thing about these is they're predictable. And that's what these charts give you. They give you that predictability. They're highly repeatable. So every single chart you buy, the cost involved is that ability of Calibrite, with their intellectual property from people like Pantone. So they're all part of the same group. They are able to print surfaces using substrates that are highly repeatable, and that's what you're getting. You're getting consistency because the thing you're measuring your white balance, or in this case your exposure from, is consistent. So if you do the same thing every single time, it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, your subject will always be consistent. And that consistency, as I said at the start, is what leads to a much easier post workflow. So if it's you doing the color grading, then you're just helping yourself out. Or, and I think this is really relevant in this day and age, if you're freelancing and you're capturing and you're handing off to production, so you're a cam op for hire and you're handing off to someone else to do the post. I hardly ever do that because I run my own agency, but occasionally I do. And it's, you're going to make yourself very popular if you're capturing very consistent, high quality images that are that the editorial team can literally just drop on the camera manufacturer's LUT, the standard LUT for that log profile, or better yet, provide that to them just in case they don't have it. I always do that. If I do hand off, I'll provide the rushes, but I'll also make sure that I email across the correct LUT for them as well. And if they drop that on and it just looks fantastic and it's white balanced properly and it's exposed properly, they're going to hire you again. You're going to keep that client happy, which is important for all of us. So in terms of exposure, let me cut back to this camera again. In terms of exposure, I'm happy that with my light at about 6.5% brightness, so it's pretty low. It can obviously go much higher. So I'm at 6.5% brightness on my camera, f2.8, ISO 200, 50th of a second. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to white balance the camera, because at the moment I'm just using a daylight preset. But the thing you have to bear in mind is that the light that's bouncing around this room, it's bouncing off all kinds of different objects in here. It is a color grading suite, so actually it's pretty good because the walls are painted with a pigment-free paint. So you know, there's pretty much nothing of color in here very much, but there is a little bit. Probably the biggest offender is on the back of the color grading suite, which is thankfully away from everything that I'm doing when I'm grading, is a little bare brick exposed, one of these kind of industrial design things that you get in these modern buildings. I've covered them up in all of the parts of the studio, but there's a small area that's behind me, which I haven't done. A small amount of light will be bouncing off that and then coming back and landing on my subject. And also all kinds of other things. You just don't know, you certainly can't see always what it is that's going to cause you problems. So doing a white balance is absolutely vital and is so very simple. Okay, so I'm not talking about using a preset, and I'm not talking about manually dialing in a Kelvin that you think might be right. I'm talking about going into your white balance settings, which you can just about see. I'm going to go to B because you can see that one. And this symbol, this like triangles lying on their side, that is the universal symbol for a custom white balance. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill the frame with, I've got a zoom lens on here, I'm just going to fill the frame. If I didn't have a zoom lens, I could just pick the camera off the tripod, move it in. It's important that you go to the chart, not bring the chart to you, because we want to measure the light that's falling on our subject, which means our chart needs to be where our subject is. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to press the custom white balance button on my camera, and it will start blinking at me. And I'm afraid you can't quite see this, but I'll read it out to you. And actually it's coming out at 5,880, which is just off from where it was. I mean, it's a couple of hundred Kelvin, nearly 300 Kelvin. It's also going to be able to spot any tints. So if I have any magenta or green, which is particularly relevant if you have if you're in a space where there's reflected light from foliage that's making its way into your space, or if you've got natural light creeping in. This is a blacked out studio, but if you're, let's say, shooting an interview somewhere and you've got natural light coming in, that is going to cause you issues because you're going to end up with potentially warmer or cooler light coming in. But by doing a custom white balance like this, actually, it will make sure and guarantee that everything is spot on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to record. So I'm just going to roll up and hit record, and I'm going to capture that grey side, and I'm going to capture the other side, the chart side, because these big chips in the middle have been very helpful for me whilst I have been setting my exposure and adjusting my lights, and they are not done being useful. So by recording the chart as well, I can then take that through into post-production, and I will show you that in the second part of this demonstration, what that looks like. Let's move my little prop that I was using to prop up my chart. So here's my subject. This is in this little demo, this is what I decided would be our subject matter. Well, let me turn still got my zebras on. Let's turn my zebras off. Clean that up for you. And in fact, let's come out of here and let's clear up the whole display. So let's, hopefully that kind of works for you. So the framing that I'm seeing is not the framing that you're seeing, so it looks a little odd potentially. But here we go. This is the product. I've literally just thrown up anything that I had to hand to demonstrate this. So I'm sort of pretending that this is a product shot, if you like. And I know that the subject is illuminated properly. So here it's some trainers, but you know, this could be the face of your interviewee. This could be a completely different product, whatever it might be. I know that it's illuminated correctly. My key is set correctly. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pop my, let's pop this on. I'm just going to pop my backlight on, which just gives me a little bit of an edge, a little bit of a backlight to my subject. I don't need to worry too much. I mean, I do within a certain extent, but I don't need to worry about the overall illumination on my subject because it's from behind. So all I need to do is just adjust this to taste by eye. I know the chart has made sure that the light at the front, the key light is actually set up correctly, so it's exposed correctly. And I can continue to work and add in any other lights. I'm going to put a little bit of a LED strip that runs along the back here, just adds a bit of texture to the background. You know, whatever it might be. If I were potentially messing around with high frame rate stuff and I wanted some lighting effects or something, I've got another LED which I could mess around with if it will turn on. So I've seen some people do some cool sort of product stuff where they're wiping on graphics, for example, or they're moving LEDs across the top and getting movement across the front of it, or whatever it might be. I can kind of go ahead and mess around with my lights as long as they're not mixing too much and influencing that key. It shouldn't mess up my image. Now, I've been showing you, let me just bring up my display here. I've been showing you the image with, let me come back here. Where is it? I've lost it. There we go. I've been showing you the image with a view assist, a display LUT on. And apologies if my audio dropped out momentarily there. It does do that. When I switch the view assist on and off, it just drops the signal slightly. Hopefully you can still hear me. If you can't, please let me know through the chat. But just to show you all what you were seeing was in fact the view assisted image. So it had a display LUT on it, which is a very straightforward C-Log2 to Rec 709 LUT. But this is actually what I've been capturing, the log image. And as such, when I bring that in to post, I'm going to have to adjust that and grade that back out. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to want to normalize it using the standard Canon LUTs that will bring it from that Canon Cinema Gamut, Canon Log 2 Gamma to my standard Rec 709 Gamut in Gamma. And this is the stage where sometimes people get tripped up. So I'm just going to turn the camera, let's not turn it off, but let me take out the card at least. And hopefully you're still hearing me. I'm just going to cut back to my other camera and let's turn this off so I don't waste the battery. And I'm going to take my SD card and I'm going to stick my SD card in my computer and I'm going to show you how I can then work with this in post. It's a very active demonstration today. Oh good, thank you. Let me just check whilst I do this. I'm going to copy this off onto my desktop. 2 seconds. So I only grabbed 2 shots, the chart and then me messing around with the lights. I'll stick that on the desktop. And whilst that's copying across, I'm just going to read to see if there are any questions. David, can you calibrate video when working outdoors in natural light? Yes, you absolutely can, David. Now, the difference is with natural light that it fluctuates. Unless you've got a completely clear day and you're working within a fairly small window of time, generally speaking, your daylight temperature is going to fluctuate. It's based on cloud cover, position and angle of the sun, time of year. It changes very rapidly in the winter. It's a bit slower in the summer. You just need to think about how long you're filming for. So for example, the other day I was shooting some interviews, just handheld, fairly fast turnaround interviews that were outside. It was a completely clear day. There was no cloud at all, very sunny. And I white balanced the camera from the chart, got my interviewee to hold the chart up and record those 2 sides. And then I was straight into the interview and we were wrapped within 30 minutes. So, you know, I don't need to worry really and didn't. That's been checked and delivered. There was no shift in terms of color temperature of that because it was half an hour and it was the same lighting conditions essentially. Half an hour in winter might have been a little bit risky. Half an hour, well, 30 seconds if there'd been cloud cover would have been risky because that cloud cover will get thinner and thicker and the light level will go up and down, but it will also get warmer and cooler. So that is tricky to manage. The thing you've got to bear in mind is it's easier to keep a consistent white balance and then analyze on a vector scope if it's moving over time, and then you can just keyframe adjustments to counteract that. I've done that many times, where either the light level or the temperature is changing, and you just keyframe it. The problem is if you use auto white balance, which reacts to those changes, A, it reacts quite slowly, I've noticed, and B, it's fairly easy to trip up. So things can completely confuse it. It's a bit like auto exposure. You know, if there's a small part of your frame that's bright, it will make the rest of it too dark, and they can get confused too easily. So it's actually better to do what I've just shown you and to white balance from the chart, even if it's natural daylight and it's going to change a bit, because at least you've got a consistent baseline from the camera, and any changes you witness in the scopes, you know, is from your source, from the sun, and you can just keyframe those differences to account for them. John, with calibration, can you only do this if you are filming in, I think you mean log rather than vlog? Oh, right, sorry, Panasonic, yeah, so you actually do mean vlog. I thought you meant like a vlog. Can you only do this if you're shooting a vlog? I have a Panasonic GH5, or can it be used if it was using different profiles, usually stamped? So hopefully I covered that off for you, John. Yes, it doesn't matter if you're shooting log or not, it's useful, whatever you're doing. The only thing to bear in mind is if you're shooting Rec 709 or a different type. So it could be, for example, like a hyper gamma, or which is what Sony calls them. Canon have their wide DR. They are not log, but they're also not true Rec 709. They're somewhere in between. You just need to make sure you know where these values drop to, and as I said, you can get that information from the camera manufacturer's website, or you can just test it yourself. So if you stick your camera in Rec 709 and expose that 90% reflectance chip at 90 IRE, just make a note of how it appears in the waveform, and then change your gamma on your camera. So that could be to a hybrid gamma, that could be to a log gamma, or anything else. Just make a note of where that 90 IRE, that 90% reflectance value, where does it go to? Wherever it drops to, you then know, you've answered that question yourself, you then know for next time, well, when I'm using whatever it might be, the vlog on a Panasonic GH5, I know that 90% reflectance drops to this number. Now, I don't know, I don't shoot with the Panasonics and haven't ever, but I'm going to guess it's somewhere near 60, because all of the log curves pretty much are. But you can measure that yourself. Again, this is the benefit of these charts, they're repeatable. So you can guarantee that what it changes to is a consistent number that will be the same whatever camera you're using. So do bear that in mind. I need to obtain a chart. Where can I source the best one, please? That's a great question, Susan, or Suzanne, apologies if I've said your name wrong. You can either go to ProAV's website, who are sponsoring this talk, or you can go to Calibrite's website. In either place, you will be able to purchase some Calibrite products, whether that's the charts or the probes for calibrating screens, or any of their other products. You can get them from there. And don't forget, I said at the start, there's going to be a code put into the chat at the end, which will actually give you a discount. I think just off the chart, but it might be off other Calibrite products as well, I'm not sure. But that will be, it's off Calibrite altogether. It's not just specifically the charts, it's off all of Calibrite's products. So that's a code that will be put up at the end. So yes, you can go there. Right, those files have finished copying off, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flick across to my desktop, and can I shrink this down? Yes, I can shrink that down. So hopefully you're all seeing DaVinci Resolve at the moment. Don't worry if you don't use DaVinci Resolve. I'm going to quickly show this in Premiere and Final Cut Pro 10 as well. So I'm just going to open up a demo project that I've got here, and just going to go to my, oh no, it was on my desktop, wasn't it? I'm just going to my desktop. I'm going to grab these two shots and bring them into my media pool. And let's close this as well, because that is distracting me. And I am just going to create a new timeline with these. So yeah, these are 3840, 2160. So let me just grab these two shots. I'm just going to create a new timeline with these shots, and let's just call this demo. Let's check everything. Yeah, that's fine. And then I'm just going to go to my edit page, and there are my two shots. Whilst oh look, there's me talking. That'll confuse everyone. I'll tell you what, let me let's get rid of that, and let me get rid of this audio, because There we go. That's a bit distracting, hearing me talking over the top of it. So there's the actual product shot. You can see it's in log, hopefully. If you can't, let's make it full screen. You can see it's in log. And there's my chart that I stuck up at the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and let's just trim this down. We don't need all of it. I'm just going to take that section, let's turn off snapping, take that section, and let's go with that section there and head into my color page. So I've now got my white balance chart here. I might just, oh hello, my screen's over started, sorry. I might just check. Kate, can you just let me know, can you actually see, I'm worried that my interface is being cropped the same way that my camera image was. If you can't see parts of the interface, this is going to be very, very difficult. So can you just let me know, can you see you know, my cursor all the way from this side to the other side? If not, let me know. Yes, good, okay, all right, well, that's fine. Great, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just apply the Canon LUT to this, because in theory, because I've exposed it technically correctly, that LUT should just work. And I'm sure there's plenty of people here who've, you know, captured in log and then they've put their camera manufacturer's LUT on it and found that it doesn't look right. That is because the camera LUT is expecting a very precise exposure based on the numbers, which I've now shared with you. If you haven't done that, if you're over or underexposed, it's not going to know that. It's not going to compensate for that. It's LUTs are dumb, so it will just apply a rudimentary adjustment to it, which will be wrong out the other end, whether that's white balance or exposure. Again, this is why we do this, so that we don't have those variables afterwards. We make this process much easier. So in fact, if I go, I'm just going to go to my color management and set this to DaVinci YGB color managed, and I'm going to tell it to, let's go to custom, and the input color space for this is Canon Cinema Gamut, and I filmed it in Canon Log 2. Let's go out to Rec 709, and that should all be correct. And let's, hang on, 2 seconds. Cinema Gamut, timeline, output, Rec 709. So what's going on? Why have you not done it? 2 seconds. Let me see why that's done that. This is a beta. Hopefully it's not messing around, or I may just be doing something stupid in my hurry. I'll tell you what, just to avoid the potential pitfall of me just doing something stupid, let me do this another way. So let me add a color space transform instead. Or I'll tell you what, let me just do the LUT, because that's probably what you would do. So let's go LUTs, Canon, and there's my Canon Log 2 to BT709 LUT. There we go. And I'll just apply that grade. Actually, not to that one. I'll come back to that one. Let's just do it to these ones here. So I've now got that LUT applied. As I said, that's just Canon's standard LUT off their website. So I've just got that applied. Now you might think, well, okay, well, that's it. Surely I don't have to do anything else. But there are other parts of this chart which are very, very useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually isolate parts of this chart to help me with this next stage. So I've created my normalization step. I'm just going to add another node after that. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click and choose show picker RGB values. And I'm just going to check, and actually it's spot on. So this is why I filmed the gray side, just to triple check that there's nothing untoward going on, or somehow the light changes. But if I move around this gray target, the RGB values are all equal. So that tells me that actually this really is completely neutral. If I saw the red, green, or the blue numbers higher or lower than the others, that would tell me there was a dominance, a problem. I can also see in the waveform, in the vector scope, that it absolutely is isolated slap bang in the middle of the vector scope. So actually there's no work to do from that. That was just for me to confirm that. So I can move straight to this side of the chart. And all I'm going to do is isolate it. Now I don't actually have to do this, but it is much easier to spot these saturated chromaticity references. These are the references for Rec 709. One of the big problems I see repeatedly, and I'm going to really stress this because it is a big problem, is people using the photo color checker. If you hold them side by side, and if you've not seen them side by side, I think way back, if you look on my Instagram, which is at Ollie Kenchington, way back there was a side-by-side photo I put up. If you ever have that opportunity, it's blindingly obvious when they're next to each other that the RGB and secondary references that are on the photo chart are for an Adobe RGB workflow, a CMYK, not CMYK, an sRGB workflow, which is not the same as the primary and secondary reference coordinates for Rec 709. They look completely different. And if you try and force the photo chart colors into the corresponding spaces for a calibrated Rec 709 signal, it will look wrong. So this is why, it sounds stupid saying it, but this is why Calibrite made a video version of this. There would be no reason to make a video version if the other one worked. But here we are specifically looking at Rec 709, RGB, and then we've got our yellow, magenta, and cyan as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn my 2x zoom on in my vector scope just to double up. So that now means the outer boundary represents 50% saturation. And I mean, it is fairly obvious, but just to isolate it, I'm just going to add a window, as they call it in Resolve, but basically a mask around these sections, and then hit Shift H, and that will hide everything outside there, and it makes it very easy to spot. Maybe not over a live stream, but I don't know how compressed this is for you guys, but that should be, if you do it yourself, very easy to see those color chips and where they land. Now, if you're using a good camera, you will find that those lines and the terminus of them, the blob at the end, is pointing exactly at these squares. And this is personally why I choose Canon, because the results you get when you white balance a Canon camera and do this, you will find that they fall pretty much exactly where they're meant to. And you might think, well, surely they all do that, but actually a lot of cameras struggle to plot all of these colors across the color wheel precisely when you capture the image, and it's very neutral, very faithful, very accurate with the Canon cameras, and that's why I use them. So if I need to adjust the angle, I can do that in my curves, my hue versus hue, and I'm going to show you this exact same thing in Premiere and Final Cut Pro because they have the same tools. They never used to, but they do now, thank goodness. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through and add preset control points on red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. And so I'm not guessing, I can use the shortcut buttons to do that down there. Now you don't have that in Premiere and Final Cut, so that's just one thing to bear in mind. Resolve is free, and if you want to, you can just do this work I'm going to show you now, and then you can actually just right click and export that LUT. So I can generate a LUT, and then I can share that back into Premiere or somewhere else if I want to. So if you find it easier, because there are more tools in Resolve for this type of thing, you can just do that with the free version and then just go back into your program. But I will show you how you can pretty much do the same thing in the other programs. Hang on, I've got a question here from Jimmy. Does 90% white or 18% gray also on the classic chart? I actually am not very familiar with the classic chart. I think they're equally stepped. I think there is a 90% white on there, and I'm pretty certain there will be an 80% gray on there. But I think there are other steps as well along the way. On the video chart, they're huge, they're much bigger. And you also have the addition on that size chart I've just used of a 20 IRE bit on it as well. Whereas with the Passport one, you don't get that. You get 90%, 18%, and the glossy black. Leon, on my C70, you have to assign the color space. It doesn't seem to default to it. On my C70, you have to assign the color space. It doesn't seem to default to it. I'm not entirely certain what you're asking me there, Leon. Try and rephrase that question for me, and I will definitely help you if I can. Right, so now I've got these isolated. My hue versus hue will allow me to adjust the angle. Let me just show you what that looks like. So for example, if my red was off, I can simply move that. So by changing the point up and down, I'm essentially rotating it around the color wheel. Now, in fact, it's absolutely fine where it is. I don't think any of them need moving, really. Maybe magenta. Magenta tends to be the weakest because it's not actually a real color. I can bore you with why another time. The other thing to then adjust is the hue versus sat. Same thing, I can add these control points. And what I want to do is make sure that these terminate in the middle of these boxes. So I'm just going to go to each different value. So here's my yellow. Sometimes when you do this, you actually notice, oh no, there is a bit of a deviation in terms of angle, and you can go back to hue versus hue and you can just tweak it. But really, it's not the end of the world. And this type of work is, you know, the icing on the cake. This is certainly not the be all and end all, but when you're a very particular individual like me, I do this extra work. So in fact, the other day, although it very rarely happens, I was handing off some stuff I'd shot to a client because they were having to edit it in a hurry. And I did create a project, create a string out of selects, and then normalized them and did this extra step and graded them and then provided them with LUTs for both the camera manufacturer LUT, but then also this adjustment, which I'm doing here. Oh, I've gone into the wrong one. Idiot. Let's go back to here. And the LUT from this work, I sent them as well, so that basically I knew that my stuff that I was providing them with was as accurate as can be. So there we go. You know, very simple amount of work there. At the moment, it's only applying that within the frame, the mask that I've created. So I'll just turn that mask off, and that essentially now becomes applied to the whole thing. Now, what you'll see in the vector scope is you'll see it adjusting and the colors going where they should be, and that is now a fully calibrated signal. And if I simply grab my product shot and just copy that whole grade across, we can see there's my log. Let's turn this off. So there's my log image, there's my normalized image using the camera LUT, and then this last one is actually tweaking the saturation and the hue angle so that it's 100% spot on Rec 709 calibrated. And that, I mean, I'm sat here in a color reference suite with a calibrated monitor. If I look to my side, I can see the trainers right there. If I look at the screen, it is literally the identical same color. And trust me, when you're working with clients like Nike, I've done stuff with Stella Artois, I've done stuff with huge brands, Apple, you know, if you get the colors of their products wrong, I guarantee you they are going to have a lot to say about it. And this is why this type of work is important. Now, I'm not going to suggest for a minute that you can always do this in every run and gun situation, but the more you do this when you have the chance to do it in situations where you have the time, the better your educated guesses get. So even when I'm run and gunning it and don't use the chart tool, it's still really close to spot on because I've just done it so many times with the charts. I know where it's meant to be, and it's a lot less kind of licking a finger and sticking it in the air. It's very accurate. There are other parts of the chart. If I just do just briefly, we've got skin tone references over here. If you have a talent on screen and if you just use a qualifier to select their skin, if everything's correct, then you should see that all of these skin tone references also become selected at the same time. So it's a good kind of verification that all of your skin looks right. But in theory, if you get all of this right, then skin's got to work. So it should all be fine. We've also got contrast steps here. What's good about these 7 steps is if you're doing this process but with multiple cameras, and in particular different camera manufacturers, so you might have a Sony and a Canon or a Arri and a Red, whatever it might be, all with their slightly different gammas, you can really fine tune the spread of contrast with this. So for example, if I just add another node here, and if I just isolate the chips, I'll do the main chips here, but for more precision, you could do these chips along the side. I can actually view that in the waveform, and I can make sure that the whole thing sits where it's meant to. So for example, if I bring my curves back up, this should sit at 90 or close to it. That should be further down towards black, and that's a 20 IRE reference there. So I can actually just tweak these values, and if I come out and turn that off, make it full screen, that's actually just a final tweak to the contrast, just to make sure that it looks right. Now, the reason why that isn't quite what it was before is simply because the LUT that I used is a transform from Canon Log 2 to Canon YDR, and YDR is not a true Rec 709 gamma. It actually deliberately slightly brings in extra highlight detail, so it will bring that 90% down a bit. So in fact, I could even go a bit further and bring that up a tiny bit more, and that is 100% now color accurate and contrast accurate as well. If I reset this and then copy that new set of grades over, there's my ungraded and then final image. Hopefully it looks easy, because it is easy. And then let me save that, quit that, and I'm very briefly just going to point out where you can do the same thing in these other programs. If I go to Final Cut Pro, and let me just import those clips, which are in my, they're on my desktop again. And again, if I just take these bits here and here, just stick them down on the timeline. And let's just move that audio, and let's stick this at the end. Let's remove the audio for that as well. It's exactly the same process. So I can come in here. There is an effect. Where are my effects? Down here, color, or is it custom LUT? There we go. If I drop that custom LUT effect on, actually I'll ignore the gray card because we've already checked it and we know it's fine. I would just check that on the vector scope. In fact, let me get my scopes up, and let's hide that because we don't need it. And let's change this to my vector scope, and we can't go to 200%, we can go to 133. You just don't put the saturation in the boxes, you just check the angle with Final Cut, and it's the same with Premiere. It doesn't actually have a 2x mode. But if I change that LUT there and then go into my LUTs, and let me choose a custom LUT. If I go to where I keep my LUTs, Canon LUTs, log 2, open, stick that on, there we go, there's my LUT, there's my starting point. And then I can start to add on effects on top of that. So let's go to a hue saturation curves. And here's my hue versus hue, hue versus sat. I can see the colors in the chart, in the vector scope nice and clearly. It's the same thing, but I don't have those presets. I just need to click one by one on these intersecting lines. They represent the primaries and secondaries. And then again, I'm just going to adjust my angle until it faces the direction. And then I would do the same with the hue versus sat, make sure that that's going the same place. So my magenta was a bit far out, and so on and so forth. If you want to, you can just arbitrarily move everything up, so it's much easier. And obviously it's way too saturated, but it makes it easier for you to judge the angle, like I said before, and the amount of saturation. And pull this around. And then once I'm happy, because that will set the ratio between them. Just doing this quickly because we're running out of time. And then once I've done that, I can actually then just pull all of them back down to where we started. So it's a little less precise than Resolve, but it's not far gone. And then if I do a curve, let's go to my waveform. Don't want that. Let's go to my Luma waveform. Let's pull that reference up to 90. With this, we can actually set a reference line, which is useful. So I'm just going to click there. That's my 90 reference line. Let's pop that. Actually, that actually clips on that, so I've slightly over-egged it in the other one, and then my glossy black and my middle grey. And we go back to the start. There we go. We can see our LUT and our adjustments before and after. And then I can just copy, Command C, Shift Command V, paste all of those attributes onto the actual product shot. And there's my final image, my final product shot, ungraded and graded, color accurate, everything as it should be. And then lastly, sorry, we're running out of time, so I'm just going to really briefly show you this one. If I go to Premiere, and let's open up this, and let's just import these clips, and let's stick them on a timeline. Let's grab those and stick them on a new sequence, and get rid of that. I've done the wrong way around, but anyway, there's the shot. And then I've just gone to my window workspaces, and I'm using the preset color layout. That is really useful. My lumetri scopes are up, so I've got my my RGB waveform here. I've got all of my controls on the other side, and if I just go down to my curves section, then there's my hue versus Saturn, hue versus hue, exactly the same as before. And then my normalization would start under basic correction, input LUT. Let's go to browse, same place, Canon LUTs. Let's make sure I get the log 2 one, not the log 3 one. Apply that, close that down, curves, and then I would go through adjusting. Let's go to my vector scope, close my waveform down, and there you go. You've got your same information there that we looked at before, and you would go through the same process that I've just shown you in Final Cut Pro. Sorry for the rapid move through at the end there, but I just wanted to make sure I had time for questions. Leon, I haven't had a refinement of Leon's question, so I apologize, Leon. I don't know exactly what it is that you were asking me. Let's go back to my full screen of my camera now. So yeah, we're done with that. So yes, Leon, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by that, but it appears to be the type of question that I should be able to answer. So maybe separately message afterwards. You can maybe do that through Instagram or something if you want to send it directly to me, at Ollie Kenchington. And then this last one from Matt: is there any pros and cons with buying the small video passport checker compared to the large color checker which you have used? Yes, so the passport one is physically smaller, so there are some things that aren't on there. So for example, I referenced the 20 IRE, the dark gray reference that's on this size one that I've been using. That's not on the passport one, but then the passport one has a focus checker, which the big one doesn't have. The other thing is, when you're white balancing, for a lot of cameras you have to fill the frame to white balance from it, and obviously a passport is physically smaller. I have a passport, it goes everywhere with me, but actually I use it much less often than the other one. The one I've been using, I use for interviews all the time because it's a really good size. The bigger the samples, the bigger the samples, the bigger the chart, the bigger the samples you can take from it in post, and therefore the more data rich it is, and the more data rich it is, the easier it is to see where these things are on the vector scope and so on and so forth. So if it's a passport and you're a wide frame and it physically only takes up a tiny part of the frame that you've captured, it's just much more difficult to turn that into useful data that you can then make those adjustments I've just shown you. So I have the passport one for sort of desktop and product stuff. I have the bigger one which I use for interviews or bigger product stuff like I've just done, and I also have the XL, which is great for drones. My DJI Mini 3 Pro goes everywhere with me. It's just another camera in my bag, and I like to use it to grab sort of shots that you wouldn't typically be able to grab. But that big chart, because it's physically so large, you can see it with drones much more easily. And I also tend to use that when I'm in the studio here and I'm remotely adjusting the exposure of cameras because it's big and I can sit it in places and see it even if it's far away from where the camera is. So that's the answer to that one. Right, I've rushed through that. There's a lot of information there. I do actually have on my, I don't really put stuff up on my YouTube channel. I'm terrible at it, and it's certainly not a resource that you can tune in every week and get another tip from me. But I do happen to have a 35-minute long tutorial about this chart. So it's basically everything I've just shown you. It's a few years old now. It's about 3 years old, but it's on my YouTube channel, which is Korro Films, Korro Films. So if you wanted to revisit that, you can. I think this is also being recorded and will be sent to you, so you can reference it as well. And the last thing is to say, look in the chat and you will see, as a big thank you for joining us today, we have posted in there that Calibrite 10% off offer, which is available at Calibrite and Pro AV. And it only leaves me to say thank you. Thank you very much for joining me, and hopefully tune in another time in the future and find out even more information about other things that are crammed into my head and I'm all too happy to share with you all. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, just Pro AV. The code is just for Pro AV, apologies. So go to Pro AV's website or give them a call and you can use that code. Right, I think we're done. I'm going to close out the presentation now. So thank you everybody for joining me.